February 20, 1943, north of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The official battle reports could never fully convey what German tank commanders observed that morning. American Sherman tanks executed maneuvers that contradicted every principle of Wehrmacht doctrine, seemingly impossible without visual coordination. Amid the dust and smoke of the North African battlefield, 5 Sherman tanks, separated by uneven terrain with no direct line of sight, converged on German positions with uncanny precision. There were no flags, no signal flares, and no dispatch riders racing between vehicles, yet the tanks moved as a single, coordinated unit, each covering blind spots invisible to the others. Each crew seemed fully aware of their comrades' positions. In contrast, Panzer IV units with FUG-5 radios struggled to hear their own company commanders over static that drowned out amplitude modulation signals. The 10-watt German transmitters, cutting edge in the 1930s, barely reached a few hundred meters while tanks were on the move. Many German vehicles carried only receivers, unable to report observations or request support. The Americans, however, operated with technology the Germans hadn't even imagined. Frequency modulation radios were installed in every tank, delivering crystal-clear communication, 25 watts of transmission power, and signal clarity that sliced through engine noise and battlefield chaos. Far from Detroit's assembly lines, a decisive technological advantage of World War II revealed itself, not through thicker armor or bigger guns, but through invisible electromagnetic waves linking every American crew in ways Wehrmacht forces could not conceive. This transformation began on July 22, 1941, when the U.S. Army standardized SCR 508, SCR 528, and SCR 538 radio sets for all medium tanks. While German units relied on command vehicle communication during advances through the Soviet Union, American engineers at the Galvin Manufacturing Company, later known as Motorola, perfected FM technology that would render German radios obsolete. The development team included Daniel E. Noble, who envisioned FM application in military vehicles, and Henryk Magnoski, the lead RF engineer who solved the challenges of installing complex electronics in the harsh environment of a tank. Their design weighed 181 pounds, effectively turning every Sherman into a node within the world's first battlefield communications network. The BC-604 transmitter produced 25 watts, 2.5 times the power of the German FUG-5, and operated in the 20.0 to 27.9 MHz range with 10 crystal-control preset channels. Dual BC-603 receivers in the SCR-508 allowed commanders to monitor multiple channels simultaneously, a capability that would prove decisive. The true breakthrough, however, was frequency modulation itself. Edwin Armstrong's FM system, licensed for military use, eliminated the static and interference that had plagued amplitude modulation radios. Whereas German systems picked up every spark and electrical disturbance as noise, American FM radios transmitted clear voice communication even amidst artillery barrages. When Operation Torch landed the 2nd Armored Division near Safi and Fadala on November 8, 1942, their Shermans with SCR 508 radios immediately demonstrated superior battlefield communication. The Afrika Korps, despite being the Wehrmacht's most experienced armored force, faced severe operational constraints due to inadequate communication systems. A standard German tank platoon of 5 vehicles included only 1 or 2 with full FUG-5 transceivers capable of both transmitting and receiving. The remaining tanks carried FUG-2 receivers only. They could hear orders, but couldn't respond or report enemy positions. German tank platoon function through rigid hierarchy. The platoon leader transmitted orders that subordinate tanks acknowledged through actions rather than words. When command tanks were destroyed, easily identified by their multiple antennae, entire platoon lost coordination. This vulnerability would prove catastrophic against American forces, where every tank could assume command functions. The Battle of Kasserine Pass, February 14 to 24, 1943, provided the first major demonstration of American radio superiority. Though tactically a German victory, the battle revealed capabilities that stunned Wehrmacht observers. During the confused fighting, scattered elements of the U.S. 1st Armored Division maintained coordination across 50 miles of battlefield. Tank crews who had never met coordinated attacks warned each other of threats and called for artillery support through crystal clear FM communications. German signals intelligence units intercepted American transmissions and noted exceptional clarity and coordination. The 10th Panzer Division's intelligence section reported that American units maintained communication at ranges where German radios produced only static. More disturbing was the realization that every American tank appeared capable of full transmission, not just command vehicles. The German FUGG-5 radios, operating on amplitude modulation in the 27.0 to 33.3 MHz range, suffered from fundamental limitations. The 10-watt transmitter struggled to reach 2 to 3 kilometers in ideal conditions, dropping to mere hundreds of meters when vehicles were moving. Every spark plug firing, every electrical motor, every track movement generated interference that AM systems couldn't filter. September 1943 brought American armor to Italy, where mountainous terrain should have negated radio advantages. Instead, FM technology proved even more valuable in conditions that rendered German AM radios useless. The SCR 508's frequency modulation handled the multi-path interference of mountain valleys far better than amplitude modulation. American tanks coordinated movements through terrain where visual signals were impossible, and German radios failed completely. During the advance toward Cassino, American armored units demonstrated capabilities that defied German understanding. Tank platoons separated by ridgelines coordinated attacks with precision that German doctrine said required visual contact. The 1st Armored Division's after-action reports described routine coordination at distances where German radios produced only static. June 6, 1944. The Red Ball Express also forced a confrontation with racial realities within the U.S. Army. The operation's success relied overwhelmingly on African American soldiers, who were still segregated, denied equal treatment, and barred from combat roles. When General Eisenhower toured Red Ball operations in September 1944, he witnessed this contradiction firsthand. His aide, Captain Harry Butcher, recorded, "The general stood watching colored drivers who had been operating for 20 straight hours. He said, 'These men are winning this war as surely as any infantry unit. We must reconsider many assumptions.'" The achievement added momentum to calls for integration. 3 years later, African American soldiers proved in France what they had always known: given opportunity and tools, they could match anyone. The Red Ball was their battlefield, and they had triumphed. German racial theorists struggled to reconcile these facts. SS publications simply ceased discussing American logistics. The evidence was too damning to ignore. After the war, German engineers studied the Red Ball Express closely, and its lessons transformed global logistics thinking. Volume overcame inefficiency. Redundancy reduced vulnerability. Decentralized decision-making accelerated operations. Standardization multiplied output. Human endurance exceeded previous assumptions. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, later wrote, "The Red Ball Express proved that logistics drives strategy, not the other way around." Americans understood this. We learned too late. Stories of individual heroism also abounded. Corporal John L. Houston drove continuously for 48 hours, delivering artillery to the 2nd Armored Division at Camera, falling asleep at the wheel 3 times, only to be revived and continue. Private Booker T. Washington's truck caught fire while carrying medical supplies. Instead of abandoning it, he drove 2 miles to a field hospital before jumping clear, saving wounded soldiers on both sides. Thousands of similar acts revealed to German observers the American military culture of individual initiative, calculated risk, and prioritizing mission completion over rigid compliance. German forces desperately attempted to replicate the Red Ball system during Operation Greif and the Battle of the Bulge, using captured American trucks to supply their units. The effort collapsed immediately. German drivers could not maintain the necessary speeds. Mechanics could not repair vehicles quickly enough. Fuel reserves could not match consumption rates. And most critically, German troops lacked the American mindset of unlimited resources. As one officer reported, "We captured 50 American trucks. Within a week, 30 were deadlined. Americans would have replaced them. Our failure explains the defeat." The winter of 1944-45 put the Red Ball Express to its ultimate test. Freezing rain, snow, and ice, conditions that should have immobilized wheeled transport, did little to halt operations. German doctrine held that wheeled logistics became impossible below -10 degrees Celsius, yet the Express continued. Drivers chained tires, poured alcohol into radiators, and pressed on. Speeds dropped from 35 to 15 miles per hour, but tonnage delivered remained constant. Observers reported ice-covered convoys moving through blizzards that had stopped entire panzer divisions. The Americans had built a logistics system resilient to weather, terrain, or enemy interference. It may not have been elegant by German standards, but it was unstoppable. By May 1945, captured German logistics officers were required to study Red Ball operations as part of historical review. Their conclusions were unanimous and humiliating. General der Infanterie Friedrich Schulz wrote, "The Red Ball Express represents a form of warfare we never imagined. Americans created a temporary civilization, thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, millions of tons of supplies, existing solely to sustain armies, then dismantled once no longer needed. We took years to build permanent infrastructure, they created superior temporary systems in days." The most insightful assessments came from General Heinz Guderian, the father of German armored warfare. "We invented blitzkrieg but never solved its fundamental limitation, logistics. Americans solved it through industrial excess we deemed impossible. The Red Ball Express was not a supply line, but a flowing river of material that drowned our forces." The Red Ball Express cost the United States approximately $100 million in 1944. Vehicles destroyed, fuel consumed, roads destroyed, French claims for damage. German staff officers accustomed to managing scarcity found the figure incomprehensible. Yet Americans considered it cheap. The operation enabled the capture of 400,000 German soldiers, the liberation of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and shortened the war by an estimated 6 months. Each day of war cost America $250 million. The Red Ball Express paid for itself in a single day of shortened conflict. Lieutenant General John C. H. Lee, commanding logistics for the European theater, stated, "We wore out 5,000 trucks and 23,000 men to destroy the German army in France. In any previous war, that would be catastrophic losses. In American industrial war, it's acceptable overhead." An unexpected consequence of the Red Ball Express was the revolutionary impact on post-war civilian logistics. Thousands of drivers returned to America with experience operating the world's largest transportation network. These veterans founded trucking companies, designed interstate highways, and created the modern American logistics industry. Companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were started by Red Bull veterans who applied military logistics to civilian commerce. They had learned in France that volume beats efficiency, speed beats perfection, and if you can keep trucks rolling 24 hours, you can move the world. Military historians universally recognize the Red Ball Express as the decisive logistics operation of the European theater. Without it, Patton's advance stops, Paris falls weeks later, and German forces successfully established winter defensive lines. The operation validated American military doctrine that emphasized logistics over tactics. While German officers studied Clausewitz and battlefield maneuver, Americans studied Detroit assembly lines and railroad timmets. The Red Bull Express demonstrated that in modern warfare, the ability to supply forces determines victory more than tactical brilliance. On September 15, 1944, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundert, Supreme German commander in the West, received comprehensive intelligence on the Red Bull Express. After studying the reports for hours, he summoned his staff. "Gentlemen," he announced, "we face something beyond military solution. The Americans have created a supply system that makes distance irrelevant. Our strategy assumed their culminating point where advancing forces outrun supplies. That point doesn't exist. They have revolutionized warfare and we are fighting the last war." His operations officer, Obus Hanspadel, suggested interdicting the Red Ball routes with the remaining Luftwaffe. Von Runet's response revealed complete understanding. "With what shall we interdict? They have 6,000 trucks. If we destroy 1,000, which we cannot, they'll replace them in a week. We'd need to destroy 200 trucks daily just to match their production." Within an hour, divisions along the front shifted to exploit the opportunity. German forces, dependent on telephone lines systematically destroyed by American aircraft, could not respond with comparable speed. Radios allowed American units from different battalions to integrate seamlessly, coordinating fires, while poorly connected German counterattacks arrived in fragments and were annihilated. In April 1945, during the encirclement of the Ruhr Pocket, American communication dominance reached its culmination. Columns from the 1st and 9th Armies executed a complex double envelopment entirely via radio coordination. Inside the pocket, 325,000 German troops were trapped, partly due to collapsing communications. Forward air controllers, using radios, directed fighter bombers to systematically destroy German communication hubs. Wehrmacht units lost contact with each other and with higher command. Field Marshal Walter Model's final messages revealed the collapse: no contact with adjacent units, no link to headquarters, fighting continued but coordination was impossible. American radio superiority profoundly affected the psychological experience of tank warfare. American crews fought with the knowledge they were never alone. Even when physically isolated, they remained connected through radio waves. German tank crews experienced the opposite, profound isolation. Unable to communicate, they fought individual battles within larger engagements. Otto Carrerius, one of Germany's most successful tank commanders, wrote in his memoir, Tigers in the Mud, about the challenges of limited communications. Though he focused more on tactical aspects than the communication gap itself, the strategic implications extended beyond individual battles. American advances in 1944-45 maintained tempo partly through radio coordination that German forces couldn't match. The Third Army's race across France depended on radio networks that maintained control across hundreds of miles. German commanders consistently underestimated American capabilities because they couldn't conceive of the communication superiority Americans possessed. Heinz Guderian, in his role as Inspector General of Armored Troops, recognized the problem but couldn't solve it. In a December 1944 memorandum, he acknowledged that American coordination negated German advantages in tank quality. After Germany's surrender, American technical intelligence teams evaluated German equipment. Their findings confirmed what combat experience suggested. German tanks often possessed superior armor and armament but catastrophically inferior communications. U.S. Army Technical Intelligence Report. Number 176 concluded. German tank communications equipment was approximately 5 years behind American systems. The absence of frequency modulation, limited radio distribution, and poor electrical suppression created critical vulnerabilities. Soviet evaluators reached similar conclusions. The Red Army, given access to captured German equipment, chose to copy American radio designs rather than German systems for post-war development. Production and deployment statistics reveal the magnitude of American achievement. American radio production 50A52A538. Radios produce 50,000 plus units. Sherman tanks produce 49,324 units. Radio deployment rate 100%. Transmission power 25W, frequency stability crystal controlled plus or minus 0.01%. Range moving 7 miles. Range stationary 10 to 15 miles. German radio production FUG-5. Transceivers produced approximately 6,000 units. Medium-heavy tanks produced approximately 12,000 units. Full transceiver deployment rate approximately 20%. Transmission power 10W, frequency stability variable plus or minus 1%. Range moving 0.5 to 1 mile. Range stationary 2 to 3 miles. Communication effectiveness average time for American fire mission 3 to 5 minutes. Average time for German fire mission 15 to 30 minutes. American tanks achieving coordination 100%. German tanks with full communication 20%. The radio superiority of Sherman tanks established principles that govern armored warfare today. Modern main battle tanks carry communication suites that trace their lineage directly to the SCR 508. Digital rather than analog, but fundamentally based on universal deployment and reliable coordination. The German Bundes, rebuilt in the 1950s, prioritized communications based on World War II lessons. Every Leopard tank manufactured has carried comprehensive radio systems. A. Bund's training manual explicitly states the defeat of superior German tanks by inferior American vehicles with superior radios teaches that information dominance outweighs platform superiority. Modern conflicts validate this lesson. In the 1991 Gulf War, coalition forces with superior communications destroyed Iraqi forces equipped with individually superior Soviet-designed tanks but inferior radios. In 2003, American forces again demonstrated that network-centric warfare defeats platform-centric warfare. The story of American Sherman tank radio superiority represents a victory in the electromagnetic spectrum that proved more decisive than advantages in armor or firepower. German tank crews fought their war partially blind to this revolution, discovering too late that every Sherman tank was not just a fighting vehicle, but a node in history's first battlefield network. The SCR 508 radio transformed the M4 Sherman from an adequate medium tank into a component of a weapons system that included every other American tank on the battlefield. This transformation proved more decisive than any improvement in armor or firepower could have achieved. Every Sherman tank carried the tools of victory, not just in its 75mm gun or sloped armor, but in the 181 pounds of radio equipment that connected its crew to every other American tank crew. This connection created a collective intelligence that no individual German tank, regardless of superiority in armor or firepower, could match. German forces discovered this reality through bitter experience at Kasserine Pass in Italy's mountains, across France's hedgerows, and in Germany's final battles. American tanks demonstrated coordination that German doctrine said was impossible. Without visual contact, the Wehrmacht never developed an effective counter because they never fully understood the technological gap. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitels commented Germany's surrender. "We knew how to build better tanks, but you knew how to make them work together." Captured a fundamental truth, whether accurately quoted or apocryphal. America had built not just 49,324 Sherman tanks but 49,324 nodes in the world's first armored battlefield network. The revolution in military affairs that historians identify with modern network-centric warfare actually began in 1942 when the first Sherman tank with an SCR 508 radio entered combat. From that moment, warfare changed forever. The side with superior communications would defeat the side with superior weapons. The strength of the network outmatched individual platforms, and units operating in concert overcame those acting alone. This shift largely went unnoticed by German forces. They observed American tactical skill but failed to grasp its technological foundation until it was too late. By the time German commanders realized that every Sherman tank had communication systems absent in most German armor, the outcome of the war was already largely decided. The German military's inability to recognize and adapt to this advantage stands as one of World War II's most significant intelligence failures. Despite repeated battlefield encounters showing the Americans' coordination edge, German leadership never prioritized addressing their critical communication deficiencies. They continued producing superior tanks that operated in isolation, while American forces deployed moderately armored tanks that functioned as cohesive, coordinated units. Ultimately, the electromagnetic connectivity provided by SCR 508 radios proved more decisive than the armor-piercing power of German 88mm guns. The capacity to share information instantly, to act as a unified force rather than a collection of individual vehicles, determined victory far more reliably than any visible advantage in armor or weaponry. The Sherman's radio superiority reshaped warfare permanently, establishing the principle that in modern combat, connectivity ensures survival, and isolation guarantees defeat. German soldiers learned this hard lesson on battlefields across 3 continents, discovering too late that American forces held not only numerical strength but a technological edge in the most critical dimension, the ability to fight as a fully integrated team.